Hello there. I just saw the name Ooh Off on the group of people who are listening. Hello, Ooh Off. Hello, Evelyn, and she reads a lot, and Sharon, and Pauline, and there were several others. All welcome, and welcome, Ooh Off. I don't know if you're a first-time new listener, watcher, but welcome, everyone. I'm Gildart. This is Fireside Reading, where every day at 5 Pacific, I sit in front of the fire live and read to you from a book that we're all reading together. It's a very old form of entertainment, and it's slower than many other forms of entertainment, and it's just a little bit of a book every day. And I'm so glad that so many people seem to be enjoying it. Everything gets uploaded to the YouTube channel, Fireside Reading, and all the books that we've read together are up there. We started this because of the pandemic, because of the lockdown, and we're continuing. Fortunately, mostly everyone's out and about now, so it still is nice to meet at 5 every day and read the book together. I won't be reading, however, tomorrow. Tomorrow I have off. I'm off to do something else. But I resume on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm not quite sure where after we'll go. But I'm actually going to go away for Christmas, so I won't be reading over about a 10-day, 11-day period of Christmas. Our daughter is in Italy, and she's studying in Italy, and we're all going to visit her, so that's going to be fun. So I'll be away, but we'll be back, and then I don't think we'll get to the end of A Passage to India before then. We're reading A Passage to India. Let's continue. Welcome to a fireside reading of A Passage to India by E.M. Forster, Chapter 24. Making sudden changes of gear, the heat accelerated its advance after Mrs. Moore's departure, until existence had to be endured and crime punished with the thermometer at 112. Electric fans hummed and spat, water splashed onto screens, ice clinked, and outside these defenses, between a greyish sky and a yellowish earth, clouds of dust moved hesitatingly. In Europe, life retreats out of the cold, and exquisite fireside myths have resulted. Balder, Persephone. But here the retreat is from the source of life, the treacherous sun, and no poetry adorns it, because disillusionment cannot be beautiful. Men yearn for poetry, though they may not confess it. They desire that joy shall be graceful and sorrow august, and infinity have a form, and India fails to accommodate them. The annual helter-skelter of April, when irritability and lust spread like a canker, is one of her comments on the orderly hopes of humanity. Fish manage better. Fish, as the tanks dry, wriggle into the mud and wait for the rains to uncake them. But men try to be harmonious all the year round, and the results are occasionally disastrous. The triumphant machine of civilization may suddenly hitch and be immobilized into a car of stone, and at such moments, the destiny of the English seems to resemble their predecessors, who also entered the country with intent to refashion it, but were in the end worked into its pattern and covered with its dust. Adela, after years of intellectualism, had resumed her morning kneel to Christianity. There seemed no harm in it. It was the shortest and easiest cut to the unseen, and she could tack her troubles on to it. Just as the Hindu clerks asked Lakshmi if asked Lakshmi for an increase in pay, so did she implore Jehovah for a favourable verdict. God who saves the king will surely support the police. Her deity returned a consoling reply, but the touch of her hands on her face started prickly heat, and she seemed to swallow and expectorate the same insipid clot of air that had weighed on her lungs all the night. Also, the voice of Mrs. Turton disturbed her. "Are you ready, young lady?" It pealed from the next room. "Half a minute," she murmured. The Turtons had received her after Mrs. Moore left. Their kindness was incredible, but it was her position, not her character, that moved them. She was the English gal who had had the terrible experience, and for whom too much could not be done. No one, except Ronnie, had any idea of what passed in her mind, and he only dimly, for where there is officialism, every human relationship suffers. In her sadness, she said to him, "I bring you nothing but trouble. I was right on the Maidan. We had better just be friends." But he protested, for the more she suffered, the more highly he valued her. Did she love him? The question was somehow draggled up with the Marabar. It had been in her mind as she entered the fatal cave. Was she capable of loving anyone? "Miss Quested, Adela, what do you call yourself? It's 7:30. We ought to think of starting for that court when you feel inclined." "She's saying her prayers," said the collector's voice. "Sorry, my dear. Take your time. Was your chota hazri all right?" "I can't eat. Might I have a little brandy?" she asked, deserting Jehovah. When it was brought, she shuddered and said she was ready to go. "Drink it up. Not a bad notion, a peg." "I don't think it'll really help me, Barasab." "You sent brandy down to the court, didn't you, Mary?" "I should think I did. Champagne, too." "I'll thank you this evening. I'm all to pieces now," said the girl, forming each syllable carefully, as if her trouble would diminish if it were actually defined. She was afraid of reticence, in case something that she herself did not perceive took shape beneath it, and she had rehearsed with Mr. McBride in an odd, mincing way her terrible adventure in the cave, how the man had never actually touched her, but dragged her about, and so on. Her aim this morning was to announce meticulously that the strain was appalling, and she would probably break down under Mr. Amrit Trao's cross-examination and disgrace her friends. "My echo has come back again badly," she told them. "But how about aspirin?" "It is not a headache, it is an echo." Unable to dispel the buzzing in her ears, Major Calendar had diagnosed it as a fancy, which must not be encouraged. So the Turtons changed the subject. The cool little lick of the breeze was passing over the earth, dividing night from day. It would fail in 10 minutes, but they might profit by it for their drive down into the city. "I am sure to break down," she repeated. "You won't," said the collector, his voice full of tenderness. "Of course she won't. She's a real sport." "But Mrs. Turton—" "Yes, my dear child?" "If I do break down, it is of no consequence. It would matter in some trials, not in this. I put it to myself in the following way. I can really behave as I like, cry, be absurd. I'm sure to get my verdict, unless Mr. Das is most frightfully unjust." "You're bound to win," he said calmly, and did not remind her that there was bound to be an appeal. The Nawab Bahadur had financed the defense and would ruin himself sooner than let an innocent Muslim perish, and other interests, less reputable, were in the background too. The case might go up from court to court with consequences that no official could foresee. Under his very eyes, the temper of Chandrapur was altering. As his car turned out of the compound, there was a tap of silly anger on its paint, a pebble thrown by a child. Some larger stones were dropped near the mosque. In the Maidan, a squad of native police on motorcycles waited to escort them through the bazaars. The collector was irritated and muttered, "McBride's an old woman." But Mrs. Turton said, "Really, after Moharram, a show of force will do no harm. It's ridiculous to pretend they don't hate us. Do give up that farce." He replied in an odd, sad voice, "I don't hate them. I don't know why." And he didn't hate them, for if he did, he would have had to condemn his own career as a bad investment. He retained a contemptuous affection for the pawns he'd moved about for so many years. They must be worth his pains. After all, it's our women who make everything more difficult out here, was his innermost thought, as he caught sight of some obscenities upon a long blank wall, and beneath his chivalry to Miss Quested, resentment lurked, waiting its day. Perhaps there is a grain of resentment in all chivalry. Some students had gathered in front of the city magistrate's court, hysterical boys whom he would have faced if alone, but he told the driver to work round to the rear of the building. The students jeered, and Rafi, hiding behind a comrade that he might not be identified, called out the English were cowards. They gained Ronnie's private room, where a group of their own sort had collected. None were cowardly, all nervy, for queer reports kept coming in. The sweepers had just struck, and half the commodos of Chandrapur remained desolate in consequence. Only half, and sweepers from the district, who felt less strongly about the innocence of Dr. Aziz, would arrive in the afternoon and break the strike. But why should the grotesque incident occur? And a number of Mohammedan ladies had sworn to take no food until the prisoner was acquitted. Their death would make little difference. Indeed, being invisible, they seemed dead already. Nevertheless, it was disquieting. A new spirit seemed abroad, a rearrangement which no one in the stern little band of whites could explain. There was a tendency to see Fielding at the back of it. The idea that he was weak and cranky had been dropped. They abused Fielding vigorously. He had been seen driving up with the two counsels, Amritrao and Mahmud Ali. He encouraged the Boy Scout movement for seditious reasons. He received letters with foreign stamps on them and was probably a Japanese spy. This morning's verdict would break the renegade, but he had done his country and his empire incalculable disservice. While they denounced him, Miss Quested lay back with her hands on the arms of her chair and her eyes closed, reserving her strength. They noticed her after a time and felt ashamed of making so much noise. "Can we do nothing for you?" Miss Derrick said. "I don't think so, Nancy, and I seem able to do nothing for myself. But you're strictly forbidden to talk like that. You're wonderful." "Yes, indeed," came the reverent chorus. "My old Das is all right," said Ronnie, starting a new subject in low tones. Not one of them's all right," contradicted Major Callender. "Das is, really." "You mean he's more frightened of acquitting than convicting, because if he acquits he'll lose his job," said Leslie with a clever little laugh. Ronnie did mean this, but he cherished illusions about his own subordinates, following the finer traditions of his service here, and he liked to maintain that his old Das really did possess moral courage of the public school brand. He pointed out that, from one point of view, It was good that an Indian was taking the case. Conviction was inevitable, so better let an Indian pronounce it. There would be less fuss in the long run. Interested in the argument, he let Adela become dim in his mind. "In fact, you disapprove of the appeal I forwarded to Lady Mellanby," said Mrs. Turton with considerable heat. "Pray don't apologize, Mr. Heslop. I am accustomed to being in the wrong." "I didn't mean that." "All right, I said don't apologize." "Those swine are always on the lookout for a grievance," said Leslie, to propitiate her. "Swine!"
"I should think so," the Major echoed. "And what's more, I'll tell you what. What's happened is a damn good thing, really, barring, of course, its application to present company. It'll make them squeal, and it's time they did squeal. I've put the fear of God into them at the hospital anyhow. You should see the grandson of our so-called leading loyalist." He tittered brutally as he described poor Noureddin's present appearance. "His beauty's gone. 5 upper teeth, 2 lower, and a nostril. Ha! Old Panalal brought him the looking-glass yesterday, and he blubbered. I laughed, I tell you, and so would you. That used to be one of those Buck N. I thought, now he's all septic. Damn him, blast his soul. I believe he was unspeakably immoral." He subsided, nudged in the ribs, but added, "I wish I'd had the cutting up of my late assistant, too. Nothing's too bad for these people."
"At last some sense is being talked," Mrs. Turton cried, much to her husband's discomfort.
"That's what I say. I say there's not such a thing as cruelty after a thing like this."
"Exactly. And remember it afterwards, you men. You're weak, weak, weak. Why, they ought to crawl from here to the caves on their hands and knees. Whenever an Englishwoman's in sight, they oughtn't to be spoken to. They ought to be spat at. They ought to be ground into the dust. We've been far too kind with our bridge parties and the rest." She paused, profiting by her wrath. The heat had invaded her. She subsided into a lemon squash and continued between the sips to murmur, "Weak! Weak!" And the process was repeated. The issues Miss Quested had raised were so much more important than she was herself that people inevitably forgot her. Presently, the case was called. Thank you all for joining me. The rest of this chapter, that was part 1 of 24. The rest tomorrow. Oh no, day after tomorrow. No reading tomorrow. The rest on Thursday. But until I see you then, everyone, please stay very, very well. Goodbye.